Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive into the source material. We've gathered a really incredible stack of research for you today.
We really have.
And the goal is simple. We want to take you right to the heart of something completely fascinating that you probably haven't thought much about.
Right.
I want you to picture the history of Christianity in India for a second. If you're like most people, your brain probably immediately jumps to European colonialism.
Yeah, that's the standard narrative.
Right, you might picture Portuguese galleons arriving with explorers, or maybe British missionaries in the 18th century. Well, today, we are going to completely upend that assumption. We're looking at a vibrant ancient network that spanned the Indian subcontinent and the Middle East for nearly 2 millennia, way before any European ever set foot in Kerala.
What's fascinating here is how this history isn't just about the spread of a religion. It is deeply, inextricably intertwined with transoceanic commerce, the ancient spice trade, and global geopolitics.
Oh, absolutely.
These early missionaries weren't wandering aimlessly into the unknown. They were traveling along highly established maritime highways. These were the exact same trade winds that linked the Persian Sassanid Empire with the incredibly powerful Chera and Chola dynasties of South India.
Exactly. And if we look at the stack of sources we've gathered for you today, from ancient copper plates to physical archaeological digs, our mission is to track down what was basically an Ecclesial Silk Road.
A great way to put it.
We're talking about a community that the texts perfectly describe as being Indian in culture, Christian in faith, and Syrian in liturgy.
It really is a history that completely redraws the map of the ancient world. When we look at these sources, we aren't seeing a story of forced colonization from the West. We are looking at an organic, deeply rooted Eastern phenomenon.
I was reading through the foundational narratives in our notes, and it all starts with the arrival of St. Thomas the Apostle. The tradition states that he landed at the port of Muziris, which is near modern Kodungallur, right around 52 AD. And to your point about the trade winds, it looks like he didn't just magically appear there. He would have traveled along the exact same incense and spice routes from the Red Sea that Roman and Middle Eastern merchants have been using for generations to buy pepper.
That's the crucial context. While modern historians sometimes debate the exact empirical verifiability of a first-century arrival, the Church of the East in India has consistently maintained this apostolic lineage.
Yeah, they don't treat it as a myth.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And it's not just a passing local legend. It aligns perfectly with the broader Mesopotamian and Persian Christian traditions that credit figures like Mar Adai and Mar Mari with founding the church in the East. They followed the trade, and the trade went to India.
And one of the things that absolutely blew my mind in these sources is how this specific history was kept alive.
Yeah.
Because they didn't just write it down in a book and put it on a shelf.
Right.
They danced it. Seriously. They preserved the story through something called the Margam Kali, which is this ancient round dance and song tradition of the St. Thomas Christians.
It's incredible.
Our notes mention there are exactly 14 stanzas in these songs. They narrate Thomas's landing in Malabar, his healings, his conversations with local Brahmins, and the establishment of 7 churches in places like Kodungallur and Kollam. The songs even cover his later mission to China and his eventual martyrdom at Mylapore. Just imagine generations of people spinning in circles, singing these exact 14 stanzas just to keep this historical record intact.
It is a beautiful method of archiving, and the linguistic clues hidden inside those songs are a historian's dream.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. When scholars analyze the Margam Kali today, they find a distinct blend of Old Malayalam and Tamil, but it is heavily peppered with Syriac loanwords.
Wow.
That specific linguistic fingerprint proves a massive, unbroken period of oral transmission before anyone ever bothered to write the words down on paper.
Okay, but we don't just have to rely on oral tradition, right? I saw a few external sources in our stack that back this up. There's a guy named Pantinus around 190 AD. He was the head of an Alexandrian seminary, and apparently he traveled to India and found an active community of Christians there.
He did, and the detail he reported back is a vital piece of the puzzle. Pantinus noted that these Indian Christians possessed a manuscript of the Gospel of Matthew written in Aramaic or Syriac, which they claimed was brought to them by the Apostle Bartholomew.
Okay, wow.
So that testimony confirms that by the late 2nd century, the Christian communities in India were already using the Syriac language. They were firmly plugged into the linguistic and cultural sphere of the Middle Eastern Church of the East.
And then there's a document from the late 3rd century called the Chronicle of Surt. It mentions a guy named Dudi, the Bishop of Basra, leaving his post in Persia to go evangelize in India.
Yes, Duty is described as an eminent doctor of the church. This is a critical primary source because it proves there was a formal hierarchical connection between the Indian missions and the church in Persia. The Indian Christian community was part of a highly organized structure well before the famous Council of Nicaea in 325 AD.
Let's just pause and imagine the sheer scale of that ancient travel for a second.
Mm-hmm.
You are navigating from the Persian Gulf all the way down the coast of India, centuries before modern navigation tools, relying entirely on the monsoon winds.
It's incredibly dangerous.
And yet, at that Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, there was actually a signatory named Bishop John, and his title was Bishop of Persia and Great India.
The connections were already that established.
Okay, let's unpack this further and move into the 4th century, because the story shifts from just individual missionaries arriving to full-blown immigration. In 325 AD, our sources highlight a merchant magnate named Naitama, or Thomas of Cana, arriving in Malabar.
This represents a massive demographic shift. This wasn't just a trading expedition looking for spices. It was a planned strategic colonization. You had 72 families representing distinct clans with names like Bagi, Belkuth, and Hadai arriving all together.
That's a huge undertaking.
It was. They brought their own priests, deacons, and a bishop named Mar Joseph of Edessa.
Why the sudden mass migration? Were they just looking to expand their business empire?
Business was a factor, sure, but the primary motivation was survival. They were fleeing severe religious persecution initiated by the ruler of the Sassanid Empire, Shapur II.
Oh, wow.
To put it simply, the Sassanid Empire was deeply Zoroastrian, and as Christianity became associated with their political rivals over in the Roman Empire, Christians in Persia became heavily targeted.
So these 72 families sail across the ocean to the Malabar coast looking for a safe haven. And apparently they are welcomed with open arms by the local Chera king, Chairman Permal. But looking at this from a purely political perspective, why? Why would a Hindu king take in hundreds of foreign refugees?
Because the Chera kings were brilliant strategists. The socio-political genius of this move really cannot be overstated.
Okay.
The Chera king didn't just tolerate these Persians out of charity. He actively integrated them as highly valued economic allies. By bringing in these established Persian merchants, the king was essentially outsourcing his international maritime trade. He was utilizing their Middle Eastern connections to bypass rival trade networks.
That makes so much sense. And he rewarded them handsomely for it. He granted them 72 royal privileges, which were inscribed on a set of copper plates known as the Nai Tamanchapidu.
Those plates are legendary.
I have to read some of these privileges from our notes because they are just so wildly specific. They were granted the right to use decorated canopies, the right to ride elephants.
The elephants are a big deal.
Right, and even the right to collect specific local taxes. It completely elevated their social status overnight. They weren't just refugees anymore. They were designated as a prestigious merchant guild called the Managram.
And the lasting impact of that specific migration is profound in Kerala even today. It created what is known as the endogamous Southist or Nanaya community.
Endogamous meaning they only married within their own group.
Exactly. Because they wanted to preserve their distinct West Asian heritage, they maintained strict internal marriage practices. This layered over the original first-century local converts who became known as the Northist community. It beautifully illustrates the distinct historical waves of influence arriving in India.
Wait, hold on. This brings up a major logistical question for me. You have this thriving, privileged community in South India, but their spiritual headquarters is back in Persia. How do you govern a church from thousands of miles away, across an ocean, in the ancient world?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it required some serious administrative gymnastics. Starting around 410 AD, the Indian church was formally put under the jurisdiction of the Metropolitan of Rewardashire.
Which is where?
That's a city located right near the head of the Persian Gulf. Rewardashire was perfectly positioned to manage both the overland silk caravans and the maritime spice expeditions. It made total administrative sense for the 5th and 6th centuries.
Right, until the middle managers start getting ambitious.
Precisely.
Our sources show that by the 7th century, a massive jurisdictional drama flared up. The Metropolitan of Rewardashire, a guy named Simeon, basically tried to assert independence from the main church in Mesopotamia. He wanted to take his whole province, which includes the very lucrative Indian mission, and run it himself.
He saw an opportunity.
And the patriarch at the time, Ashoyab III, was terrified he was going to lose India entirely because of this rebellion.
It was a genuine crisis. When your regional director tries to hijack your most distant, profitable branch, you have to act decisively. Patriarch Ishaiah III's solution was to completely cut Rewardashir out of the loop.
Just bypass them completely.
Exactly. He elevated India to become its own separate metropolitanate known as Bethinde. It was ranked among the provinces of the exterior, right alongside their missions in China and Samarkand.
But because India was a province of the exterior, they had to adapt the rules, right? The Indian metropolitans didn't actually have to attend the general church synods back in the Middle East.
They couldn't. The massive distance, which was often a perilous journey of many months across monsoon-swept oceans, made regular attendance impossible. So they were given a special dispensation. Instead of showing up in person, they just had to send a letter of allegiance to the patriarch every 6 years, along with funds to support the patriarchal see.
Just wrap your mind around the logistics of that. Every 6 years, drafting a letter, putting it on a wooden ship, hoping it survives pirates, storms, and the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean, just to say, hey, we're still here, still loyal.
It's a miracle the system worked at all.
And the crazy thing is, we actually have eyewitness proof of this entire network operating. I was looking through the notes at this guy, Cosmas Indicopleistes. What exactly was a 6th century Greek merchant doing, taking notes on Indian churches?
Cosmas is essentially the ancient world's travel blogger. He traveled extensively around the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean between 520 and 530 AD. And he compiled his observations in a book called The Christian Topography.
A travel blogger, I love that.
He really is invaluable because he provides a contemporary, independent snapshot of this network. He explicitly writes about finding highly organized Christian churches with bishops and clergy appointed all the way from Persia. He found them in Ceylon, which is modern Sri Lanka, in Malabar, which he famously called the place where the pepper grows, in Kalyana near modern Mumbai, and even on the island of Socotra.
He literally saw the Persian-appointed clergy operating these outposts along the trade winds with his own eyes. It wasn't a myth. It was permanent religious infrastructure hiding in plain sight. Let's fast forward a bit to the 9th century, specifically the 820s AD, because we get another massive wave of arrivals. 2 bishops, Mar Saber and Mar Proth, land at the port of Quilon, or Cullum. And this leads us to what might be my absolute favorite artifact in this entire deep dive, the Terracepali copper plates of 849 AD.
Those plates are widely considered among the most important indigenous historical documents in all of Kerala. The local Vinod king issued them to a Persian merchant magnate named Maruvan Sapir Iso. He was essentially the secular leader of the mission that Mar Sabor and Mar Proth arrived with.
The specifics on these plates are mind-blowing. The Hindu king gave this Christian church sweeping tax exemptions. He basically transferred his royal revenues directly to them.
Quite the gift.
Yeah, he gave them legal autonomy, meaning the church could investigate its own members and try its own legal cases. And crucially, he gave them custody of the town's seal and the official weights, the steel yard.
That last detail is paramount. By giving them the steel yard, the king was giving them a monopoly on the public weighing office for the spice markets. In an economy based on the export of pepper and cardamom, controlling the scale meant you controlled the flow of wealth.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's the 5th plate in this set, the signatures of the witnesses.
Ah, yes. The 5th plate is an absolute marvel. On that singular piece of copper, you have signatures written in Kufic Arabic, cursive Pahlavi, which is Middle Persian and Standard Hebrew.
You have Muslims, Zoroastrians, and Jews all co-signing a legal grant for a Syrian Christian church issued by a Hindu king in South India.
It perfectly illustrates the reality of the era. This epigraphical evidence proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the church wasn't some isolated religious enclave. It was a core node in a highly sophisticated transoceanic multi-faith trading network, and they were all operating harmoniously, doing business together under the umbrella of Chera royal protection.
And it isn't just copper plates locked away in museums. There's physical archaeology you can go look at today. I'm talking about the famous St. Thomas crosses, or Pahlavi crosses, found at places like St. Thomas Mount in Mylapore and the Vilayapalli Church in Kottayam.
They are visually stunning.
Looking at the pictures in our sources, they are these beautiful bas-relief granite crosses. But the cross itself is resting on a lotus flower. It's this gorgeous cultural adaptation to Indian aesthetics.
And surrounding that cross are inscriptions in Pahlavi. The use of Pahlavi is a definitive historical marker. That specific script largely died out in Persia after the Zoroastrian Sassanid Empire collapsed during the Arab conquests around 651 AD.
Right, which explains a really quirky detail the epigraphists found. On some of these crosses, the Pahlavi inscriptions are actually unintelligent copies.
Unintelligent meaning they didn't know what they were writing.
Exactly. The craftsman used a process called estampage to lift a master copy and replicate it on new crosses. By that point, the local craftsmen carving the stone couldn't actually read Pahlavi anymore. They were just faithfully, mechanically reproducing the sacred script their ancestors had brought over centuries before. It's literally like copying the font of your heritage without knowing the alphabet.
It's a beautiful physical metaphor for preservation, and that theme of preservation becomes even more critical as we move into the 14th century. The geopolitical landscape of the world shifts radically, but the Indian Church remains incredibly connected. During the 13th and 14th centuries, the Church of the East experienced a major global expansion under the Mongol Empire.
Let's transport you, the listener, to June of the year 1301. We are in the royal city of Cranganore in South India. Picture the humidity, the smell of the nearby spice markets, and sitting in a room is a 14-year-old deacon named Zachariah. He is painstakingly copying a dense Syriac manuscript. We know this because that exact manuscript survived. It's currently sitting in the Vatican Library.
And the colophon, which is the scribe's personal note at the very end of Zachariah's manuscript, is breathtaking for what it reveals about their worldview.
What does he say?
This teenager mentions the global leader of the church at the time, Patriarch Yaballaha III. He refers to him as the Turk. Yaballaha III was actually an Ongit Turkic patriarch who had close diplomatic ties with the Mongol Khans. Zachariah also mentions his own local metropolitan, Mar Yaqub of India.
So you have a 14-year-old kid in tropical South India writing a note that casually links him directly to a Turkic patriarch operating within the massive Mongol Empire up in Eurasia. It just utterly shatters the idea that the ancient world was disconnected or isolated.
This raises an important question, though. When you have a network that vast spanning from the Mongol steppes down to the Malabar coast, how did they maintain such a unified identity? Especially when they were completely cut off from each other for years at a time.
Right. How do you keep everyone on the same page?
The answer lies in their liturgical patrimony. The St. Thomas Christians are known as Syrian Christians or Syriani, entirely because of their strict use of the Syriac language in their worship.
Right. They follow the East Syrian rite. Our notes detail how they use the liturgy of Adai and Morai, which is one of the oldest, continuously used Eucharistic liturgies in the entire world. They had a massive compilation of prayers called the Kudra,
which focused heavily on the economy of salvation, basically the overarching story of how humanity is saved.
And they even developed their own hybrid script called Garshuni Malayalam, where they wrote the local South India Malayalam language using the Syriac alphabet.
That synthesis is the key to their survival. But there is a much more profound point here regarding global historical preservation. Over the centuries, West Asia, Mesopotamia, and Persia faced devastating instability and severe persecution. Many ancient Middle Eastern texts were completely destroyed in their homelands.
But India was safe.
Precisely. Because the Indian Church had been meticulously copying and archiving these exact texts for generations, the Kerala archives became the crucial preservers of that ancient heritage. In theology, we say the law of prayer maintains the law of belief. By keeping their distinct ancient liturgy alive in India, they maintain their exact doctrinal alignment with the Patriarchate of the East, regardless of the empires rising and falling in between them.
Which makes the next chapter of this deep dive so incredibly tragic. We hit the year 1498. The Portuguese arrive in India, sailing around the Cape of Good Hope. You would think they'd be thrilled to find millions of fellow Christians already there. But instead of greeting them as long-lost siblings, the Portuguese view these ancient Indian Christians as heretical Nestorians.
It was a brutal clash of worldviews. To put it simply, the Portuguese were coming from the Latin Catholic tradition, centered in Rome. The Indian Christians followed a theology that had split off way back in the 5th century over complex debates about the nature of Christ. To the Portuguese, this wasn't an ancient, beautiful tradition. It was a heresy that needed to be corrected.
They just couldn't accept it.
No. They sought to completely absorb this Eastern Church into the jurisdiction of Rome. This campaign of systematic suppression finally culminated a century later at the Synod of Diamper in 1599.
And the Synod of Diamper wasn't just a polite theological debate. They didn't just ask for a few minor tweaks. They forcibly removed the East Syrian metropolitan. They aggressively Latinized the ancient rituals, trying to purify the liturgy of Adai and Mari to make it look more European.
It was a very systematic dismantling.
And most devastatingly, they ordered the mass burning of any Syriac books that didn't conform to Latin dogma. Irreplaceable ancient texts like the Nomo Canon and the Book of the Bee were just thrown into the fire.
It was a deliberate, institutional attempt at cultural erasure. They were trying to sever the community's textual and hierarchical ties to the Middle East once and for all.
So what does this all mean for the community today? Because they obviously didn't just disappear.
No, but the fallout from the Synod of Diamper permanently splintered the community. Today, you have the Syro-Malabar Church, which remained in communion with Rome but fought hard over the centuries to restore its distinct Eastern liturgy.
Okay.
And then you have groups like the Chaldean Syrian Church of Thrissur, which actually managed to revive its direct links to the Assyrian Church of the East in the 19th and 20th centuries, bringing over Middle Eastern metropolitans to officially restore their original apostolic line.
It is an absolutely staggering history of resilience.
If we look back at the entire journey we've covered, it is a truly millennial legacy of cross-cultural integration. We have the foundational apostolic traditions of St. Thomas navigating the spice routes. We have the strategic migrations of Persian merchants fleeing the Sassanids. We see the incredible economic alliances with Hindu kings who empowered them. And we see a resilient, beautiful liturgical tradition that survived against all odds. Combined, they created a transcontinental legacy linking the highlands of Mesopotamia to the shores of Kerala.
It really reframes how we think about the ancient world. And before we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. If the Portuguese had somehow been completely successful, if they had managed to track down and burn every single Syriac manuscript at the Synod of Diamper, would the physical embodied practices have been enough to save them? Think about the 14 stanza Margam Kali dance we talked about at the very beginning. Would spinning in circles and singing those old Tamil and Syriac words have been enough to preserve the complete theological identity of the Church of the East in India? It raises the question of whether a culture's true historical survival relies more on the fragile texts we write down in books or the songs we teach our children to sing. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the source material. Keep questioning what you think you know and keep exploring the incredible layered history of the world around you.